conversations about mental health, wellness, and life in general. This is the Self-Work Podcast with Dr. Bundi. If you've ever heard of the term post-weaning depression, raise your hand. If you've ever stopped breastfeeding and you feel a wave of unexpected emotions, raise your hand. This episode is for you. Anyone who's breastfed and is relating to what I'm saying, this episode is for you. My name is Dr. Bundi, the women's psychiatrist, and this is the Self-Work Podcast. We have conversations about mental health and wellness, and more recently, we've narrowed it down to women's mental health and wellness. So welcome, and today we are talking all about breastfeeding. I came across the term post-weaning depression, and I was shook. I'll start off by giving you a bit of my personal journey, and then I will describe exactly what post-weaning depression is. Because for many women, breastfeeding and weaning, all these experiences are so unique, right? But some women go through a period where you stop breastfeeding for one reason or another, and then you're hit with a wave of emotions. That's what we are calling post-weaning depression. It's very similar to postpartum depression, but we'll get to the intricacies of that a bit later. So my personal journey with breastfeeding, I've shared this on my social media platforms. If you don't follow me, you should, because that's where I share more frequently about the things that I go through day to day. So I went through challenges with the initiation of breastfeeding. You know, no one tells you that when a baby is born, they don't know anything. They don't know how to latch. And so as you're doing that dance of trying to get them to latch and the milk coming, because it takes time, especially if you've had a cesarean section, which I did, that dance can bring up feelings of anxiety, inadequacy, and low mood. So I had a bit of issues breastfeeding, but through the support of so many women online, a group of women who we formed a WhatsApp group, we gave birth at the same time, lactation experts, a lot of research. I lived on Reddit. I would Google everything. I managed to get to the point where I loved breastfeeding and I became good at it. I became good at pumping. I managed to get a good stash of milk supply. So I was very, very grateful. And I loved it. It became my routine. I remember, the evening time, I would pump with my partner as we were watching something. It just became a part of me. And so when I had to stop at 11 months, and this just happened, my body just decided we don't have enough milk, and my baby took to the bottle very well. I went through a wave of feeling like, is this it? It was so anticlimactic. There was sadness, there was anxiety, wait a minute, my friends are still breastfeeding. So that's what I went through. And because I've had issues in the past with depression and anxiety, which I've talked about before, I reached out to my doctor, my therapist, and I said, something doesn't feel right. And to my surprise, they were not surprised. They told me the science behind it, that yes, when you stop breastfeeding, when some women are breastfeeding, they go through this. And that's why I wanted to break the silence, because I don't believe a lot of us know what post-weaning depression really is. So there are two aspects that we will talk about, right? And it's very similar to postpartum depression. Post-weaning depression is caused by an emotional shift and a hormonal shift that comes when you stop breastfeeding. So remember we said emotionally, you're going through things, you're comparing, maybe you're feeling inadequate, maybe you're comparing yourself with other people, maybe you're feeling a bit lost, like, okay, what happens now? That's the emotional side of it. But however, there's also a hormonal aspect to it, whereby I feel like we are not in control of. So remember in our last episode, we talked a lot about breastfeeding and mental health, and we talked about oxytocin, which is really the feel-good hormone that helps you bond with the baby. It helps you feel calm, right? And I'd encourage you to watch that episode. Once you're done with this one, make sure you watch that one. So oxytocin is usually high when you're breastfeeding. It's the one that gives you those feel-good feelings when you're breastfeeding. So when you stop, oxytocin levels drop, and that can send your mood into a bit of a spin. And as you're transitioning, if you're not aware to it, it can really be frustrating, and it can even trigger and take you on to a full depression. So it's a recipe for a perfect storm, but let's talk about the symptoms, and then later I'll give you a bit of tips and tricks of how to go about this. So I mentioned earlier, symptoms include anxiety, mood swings, being irritable, especially towards your baby. I remember, and I'm embarrassed, I remember I was in denial that the baby didn't want to breastfeed, but I would always try to latch. And it gets frustrating. You're like, why don't you want to do this anymore? So irritability, sadness. You may have physical symptoms of fatigue, trouble sleeping, and trouble concentrating. I want you to know that because you're aware now, you can do something about it, either in the next pregnancy, or you can share this with somebody who's pregnant. You're not imagining it, and you're not being dramatic. I came to validate what you're feeling. You are not being dramatic. So those are just some of the symptoms. But remember, our bodies are so different. So some women might even have some other symptoms that I've not mentioned. So let's move over to the better part of the video where we can talk about how to navigate this situation. As always, I always encourage women who've given birth at any point, whether it's postpartum, 6 months later, 1 year later, walk the journey with an anchor who is a professional, so either a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't think that we have to tough it out, especially when it comes to our emotions and our mental health during these periods of pregnancy and breastfeeding. Get an anchor, get an emotional anchor, get a specialist, somebody who can actually even assess you. Another anchor that I would encourage is to get a community of women who have given birth around the same time, form a WhatsApp group, have these conversations. Because when I spoke about it and realized that actually a friend of a friend had gone through it, I felt so validated, like I'm not being dramatic. A community of people going through the same thing is really important. Something else you can do about post-weaning depression is, we're always in a hurry to wean. Take your time. Paced weaning. There's so many things that we want to do. We want to do the baby-led. And I'm not here to say this is bad, I'm just saying, take your time. I remember at the beginning, it was like my baby, it took time for him to get used to certain textures. And it would be, 2 scoops, and then it's like, I don't want any more. And it would be frustrating. So I want you to know that take your time. There's no race. 2 spoons is enough at the beginning. Yeah. If your baby can't deal with baby-led weaning, it's okay. Yeah. Pace yourself. Pace yourself. And lastly, I want you to know that one way you can cope is to reconnect with your body. And breastfeeding sometimes can feel like you're no longer connected to that part of your body. And weaning is a sign from the universe, from God, that it's time to reconnect with your body, because sometimes it can start to feel like it's no longer your own. It belongs to somebody else. Self-care. Return to yourself. Pour into yourself, because you've been pouring out literally. And it can be draining. So prioritize your self-care. Get that extra rest. I remember for me, I was actually a bit relieved eventually once the post-weaning depression left, which it does, by the way, because your body remembers that, okay, oxytocin is gone, your body balance is back. I remember feeling relieved that I don't have to carry my pump every time I leave the house. Hallelujah. I don't have to, you can't lie. Well, for me, I couldn't sleep on my tummy, which was my favorite sleeping position. I was so happy to return back to that. So I was happy that my baby is fed, healthy. So return back to the life that you had before you were breastfeeding. So lastly, I want to send a message of encouragement to anybody who is in the thick of breastfeeding, who's in the thick of post-weaning depression. I want you to know that your value is more than how much you can breastfeed. Breastfeeding is great, by the way. It is a beautiful process, but you're more than a milk machine. Yeah. And your baby is able to connect with you through many other ways than breastfeeding. So it's time to figure out how to connect with your baby, even if you're not breastfeeding. All right. So remember, post-weaning depression is real. And if you need to talk to somebody, maybe you're going through the same thing, you can reach out to me or any other psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, any professional. So as always, leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know, have you gone through this? Did you know that this was a thing? And let me know. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.